What if the first sign of dementia didn't look like dementia at all? No memory loss. No confusion. Just a strange sentence. A fleeting moment so subtle, it almost goes unnoticed. But years later, that moment turns out to be the first clue that something was wrong. The reality is, dementia doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And if you're not paying close attention, you might miss the early warnings entirely. Even trained doctors sometimes overlook the signs because they don't always fit the textbook description. In this video, we'll walk you through the most commonly overlooked early signs of dementia, the ones families often dismiss until it's too late. But first, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more eye-opening health content tailored to you. Now let's begin. Sign number 1. Why do I keep losing everything? For Marcia, 70, it began with simple things: her glasses, her keys, her phone. She'd lose them constantly, blame someone else, then forget she even moved them. That phrase, "Why do I keep losing everything?" became a quiet chorus in her daily life. 2 years later, she was diagnosed with early onset dementia. By then, the damage had already taken root, not just in her memory, but in her confidence and self-trust. Here's what was happening inside her brain. The hippocampus, the region responsible for forming and retrieving memories, was already beginning to weaken. So, it wasn't just that she forgot where she put something. She forgot that she ever moved it at all. This creates a missing link in the memory chain, causing people to feel confused, helpless, and often defensive. It can evolve into denial or even misplaced blame, simply because the brain can no longer reconstruct the event. According to medical reviews, frequent misplacing of items, especially when it's accompanied by repeated concern or anxiety, is one of the most common self-reported symptoms during the preclinical stage of dementia. This isn't ordinary forgetfulness. When someone repeatedly asks why they keep losing things, it may be their brain's way of sounding an early alarm. Sign number 2. Why is everyone talking so fast? Ernest, 76, began to withdraw from conversations. He complained that people around him were rushing their words. "I can't keep up anymore," he told his wife. "Everyone's talking too fast." At first, it was brushed off. After all, his hearing tests were completely normal. But nearly 3 years later, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. What he was experiencing wasn't a hearing problem. It was a comprehension problem. In early stages of dementia, auditory processing speed can begin to slow down. This means the brain starts to struggle with following speech in real time, especially in noisy environments like restaurants or family gatherings. It's not the ears that are failing. It's the brain's ability to process the rhythm and flow of conversation. As a result, even calm conversations can feel rushed, confusing, or overwhelming. This often leads to social withdrawal because the individual feels embarrassed, lost, or mentally exhausted. So when someone starts saying others talk too fast, it might not be about the room at all. It could be a signal that the brain is struggling to keep pace. Sign number 3. You never told me that. Grace, 69, would often argue with her children. She insisted they never told her about family plans, vacations, birthdays, doctor appointments. But they had, repeatedly. This reaction, "You never told me that," happened so often it became a point of tension. Everyone assumed she was just being forgetful or stubborn. But 2 years later, she was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. What her family didn't realize is that her brain had failed to register the information in the first place. This isn't intentional denial. It's a genuine cognitive slip. When the brain fails to encode a memory, there's nothing to recall. To the person experiencing it, it genuinely feels as if the event or conversation never happened. And because they trust their own perception, they often blame others for forgetting to tell them. This kind of defensive confusion is extremely common in early dementia and can strain relationships, especially when loved ones don't recognize it as a neurological red flag. If someone regularly claims they were never told something, even after multiple confirmations, it might be time to look deeper. Sign number 4. That's not what I meant. Lucille, 74, started making unusual language mistakes. She'd say the wrong names, ask incomplete questions, or stop mid-sentence. When corrected, she'd become defensive. "That's not what I said." These subtle shifts in communication occurred years before her official Alzheimer's diagnosis, but the signs were already there. Experts explain that in the early stages of cognitive decline, the brain begins to misfire in its language centers. This can result in misused or forgotten words, incomplete thoughts, sentences that don't quite make sense, a lack of awareness that it's even happening. The person often believes they're speaking clearly because their self-awareness is fading right alongside their linguistic abilities. This disconnection between intention and expression can cause deep frustration, not only for the individual, but also for family and friends. When someone repeatedly insists they didn't say something, or they struggle to complete clear thoughts, it could be a sign that the language processing regions of the brain are deteriorating. Sign number 5. I think something's wrong with my brain. For years before her official Alzheimer's diagnosis, Diane, 71, began expressing a quiet concern. She didn't panic. She wasn't forgetting names or dates, but during calm moments, she would say something simple, yet deeply unsettling. I think something's wrong with my brain. She wasn't referring to memory lapses or confusion. Instead, she described it to her daughter as a vague sense of being off, like a dim light flickering somewhere in the background of her thoughts. Her doctor reassured her. Tests were normal, and cognitively she seemed fine. But the feeling never left her. Over time, that internal discomfort began to morph into subtle anxiety. Restlessness she couldn't explain, a growing unease she couldn't shake. This phenomenon is known in neuroscience as subjective cognitive decline, SCD. A state where individuals sense that their cognitive function is slipping, even when no deficits show up on traditional tests. Research has shown that this self-perceived mental change often precedes clinical dementia by several years. It's not about failing memory tests. It's about an internal disconnect, a growing gap between what the person feels inside and how they appear to others on the outside. This early warning sign is often dismissed as worry or overthinking. But in truth, it may be the brain's very first whisper for help. So when someone says this, even casually, even with a laugh, listen closely. It might be a quiet signal that the mind is beginning to shift. Sign number 6. I just don't feel like myself anymore. Nancy was 67 when her spark began to fade. She wasn't forgetful. She wasn't confused. But she kept repeating the same phrase. I just don't feel like myself anymore. At first, her family thought it was depression. After all, she seemed emotionally flat, unmotivated, withdrawn, distant. But despite therapy and lifestyle changes, nothing helped. That emotional heaviness never lifted. 2 years later, she was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, FTD. A condition that doesn't begin with memory loss, but with shifts in personality, emotion, and behavior. Researchers have found that in some types of dementia, the earliest warning signs don't show up in cognitive tests, but in emotional blunting, the quiet erosion of someone's inner vibrance. People in early decline may lose interest in activities they once loved, struggle to express feelings, feel like they're drifting from who they once were. Unlike typical depression, this emotional numbness doesn't respond to support or time. It's the result of subtle changes in the brain's frontal and temporal lobes, which regulate personality and emotional control. Outwardly, the change may be invisible, but inwardly, the person feels like a stranger to themselves. So when someone repeatedly says they don't feel like themselves, don't overlook it. It may be the earliest sign that their emotional wiring is beginning to shift. Sign number 7. Stop changing things, I can't keep up. Ronald, 75, had always been easygoing. But over time, something in him began to tighten. He grew increasingly irritated over little changes. Whether it was a new brand of cereal, furniture moved around the house, or updates to the TV remote. Why does everything have to change? He asked. I just want things to stay the same. What started as mild discomfort slowly turned into fixation. 3 years later, he was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, MCI, a condition often considered a transitional stage between normal aging and early dementia. The first clue hadn't been memory loss. It was rigidity. According to cognitive science, the early stages of dementia often involve a loss of cognitive flexibility, the brain's ability to adapt to new information, environments, or routines. Suddenly, small changes can feel overwhelming, like the mind is unable to process and integrate even minor disruptions. This isn't stubbornness. It's mental overload, confusion disguised as resistance. To loved ones, it may seem like a personality shift. But to the person going through it, Each change feels like the world spinning out of control. So when someone who once embraced change begins to fear it, when even small adjustments spark frustration, pay attention. The brain may be struggling to keep up with what once felt easy. Sign number 8. Everyone's against me. 2 years before his diagnosis with Lewy body dementia, 78-year-old George began to change. But it wasn't forgetfulness or confusion that first surfaced. It was suspicion, a creeping sense that people around him were no longer to be trusted. He accused neighbors of spying. He whispered to his wife that their daughter was hiding things from them. There was no shouting, just a quiet, growing paranoia. At first, his family thought he was simply becoming irritable with age. But the fear deepened. He stopped wanting to leave the house. He flinched at unexpected noises. The world, once familiar and safe, began to feel hostile. This kind of behavior, though shocking, is not uncommon in the early stages of dementia, especially in conditions like Lewy body or Alzheimer's disease. Studies have shown that paranoia, delusions, and distorted beliefs can precede major memory loss, often by several years. The brain begins to misinterpret social cues and reality. Where there is neutrality, the person sees threat. Where there is kindness, they sense manipulation. It's not simply fear. It's a deeper breakdown in how the brain interprets trust, intention, and safety. And tragically, the people they fear the most are often the very ones who love them the most. Over time, these false beliefs can harden into fixed delusions, making early intervention difficult. Families are left confused, hurt, and desperate to understand what's happening, why their loved one suddenly believes they're the enemy. If someone who was once trusting begins expressing irrational suspicion, especially toward close friends or family, don't dismiss it as just a personality quirk. It could be the brain's early descent into a place where reality itself is slipping away. Sign number 9. You're the one who keeps messing things up. Ben, 69, was never the kind of man to raise his voice. But something shifted. Suddenly, minor mishaps turned into arguments. He began snapping at his wife, accusing her of confusing him on purpose. "You told me the wrong time. You always do this. You're trying to make me look stupid." The blame was constant, and it stung. This behavior started about 3 years before Ben was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. By the time the diagnosis came, the damage to his closest relationships had already been done. These emotional outbursts weren't just stress or stubbornness. They were an early symptom of emotional dysregulation caused by cognitive decline. As memory starts to slip, even subtly, the brain senses that something isn't right. But instead of admitting fear or confusion, the person may project it outward. The result: irritability, defensiveness, and blame, especially toward loved ones. This isn't intentional. It's the mind trying to protect itself from the embarrassment and anxiety of not understanding the world as it once did. Anger becomes a shield. Accusations become a way to avoid vulnerability. And sadly, these changes are often mistaken for selfishness, stubbornness, or even cruelty, when in reality, they are signs of fear and confusion masquerading as aggression. So when a calm, gentle person suddenly becomes critical, impatient, or accusatory, especially in situations where they once showed grace, it may not be their personality turning bitter. It may be their brain crying out in confusion. They don't always start by forgetting names. Sometimes the first cracks appear in behavior, tone, or a single haunting sentence. "I think something's wrong with my brain. I just don't feel like myself. You're the one who keeps messing everything up. Everyone's against me." These aren't just random remarks. They're early messages, echoes of a mind trying to make sense of a world that is quietly beginning to blur. Catch these signs early, and you open a door to early intervention, support, and hope. Miss them, and what follows may be a silence that cannot be undone. Have you noticed subtle changes in a loved one? If any of these moments feel familiar, don't wait. Talk to a doctor. Ask questions. Observe carefully. Because dementia doesn't begin with a bang. It starts with a whisper. If you found this video helpful, like, share, and comment below with your experience. Let's help more families catch the signs early, before it's too late.